In the Oval Office in Washington, U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky met for the second time in 6 months, delivering critical messages about the future of the war. At first glance, the meeting appeared friendly and smooth, but behind the scenes it concealed major tensions. Because the real question on the table is this: is this war truly nearing its end, or are we entering a new phase? The meeting, also attended by European leaders, carried the atmosphere of transatlantic unity. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz's words were striking. My expectations were not only met but exceeded. This points to a rising wave of hope on the European side. But here's the interesting part. Despite this optimism, no concrete progress was made on the fundamental issues of the war. In other words, while everyone smiles at each other, massive unresolved obstacles remain behind the curtain. Ukraine wants strong security guarantees from the West to avoid being attacked again in the future. But the form of such guarantees is still unclear. Will it be a NATO-style security umbrella, or will it remain limited to weapons and training support? Here is where a big question mark arises. Because Russia has completely shut the door on the idea of any NATO force in Ukraine. Putin is firm on this. We will not accept it. Now, let's come to a critical point. Trump's position. In his meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office, he said a ceasefire was unnecessary. But after a closed-door meeting with European leaders, he told the press, "While working for lasting peace, of course we prefer an immediate ceasefire." These contradictory statements actually show America's strategic dilemma. On one hand, Trump wants to stay at the table with Putin, while on the other hand, he must meet Europe's expectations. So what does this whole picture tell us? First, the fate of the war in Ukraine is no longer solely in the hands of Kiev and Moscow. Washington, Berlin, Paris, and London are also moving the pieces on this chessboard. Second, despite the diplomatic atmosphere of hope, Russia continues to advance on the ground, which means time may actually be working against Ukraine. Here, I want to leave a main question to you, the viewer. If the war drags on and Ukraine fails to secure new guarantees, who will benefit from this outcome? The West or Putin? In a moment, we'll dive into the most critical knot of the war, Ukraine's demand for security guarantees, and why those guarantees remain undefined. But first, a small request. If you enjoy these kinds of geopolitical analyses, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video. Your support gives me the strength to prepare new content. And now, let's take a closer look at one of the most decisive issues shaping the future of the war: security guarantees. Because this matter will not only determine Ukraine's future, but also reshape the entire security architecture of Europe. Section 2. Security guarantees for Ukraine. One of the most critical issues that will determine Ukraine's post-war future is security guarantees. Zelensky and his team know very well that any agreement reached at the table, if not backed by strong deterrence, will remain only on paper. The 1994 Budapest Memorandum is still fresh in Ukraine's memory. Kiev handed over its nuclear weapons in return for assurances from the U.S., the U.K., and Russia regarding its territorial integrity. But when Crimea was annexed in 2014, those assurances proved worthless. That's why Zelensky does not want to make the same mistake again. Today, Kiev's expectation is for a guarantee mechanism similar to NATO's Article 5, meaning that any attack on Ukraine would be treated as an attack on Western allies. But here lies the problem. NATO members are hesitant to give Ukraine such an explicit commitment because it carries the risk of a direct confrontation with Russia. The U.S. position is decisive here. Trump stated in talks that he would help provide protection, but rejected the idea of American troops being deployed in Ukraine. In other words, Washington wants to remain more in a coordinator role. This approach falls short of meeting European leaders' expectations. Especially the Baltic states and Poland believe that Russia's territorial ambitions will not stop at Ukraine. For them, this war is directly linked to the security of their own borders. On the European front, an interesting picture emerges. A new security coalition has been formed with the signatures of more than 30 countries. Among them are Japan and Australia, which also pledged support to Ukraine. But the real impact of this coalition on the ground remains uncertain. Will it truly be a deterrent force, or merely a diplomatic gesture? Putin's stance is very clear. If NATO or Western troops are stationed in Ukraine, Moscow will view it as an unacceptable threat. In fact, according to leaks from sources close to the Kremlin, Russia could use such a development as justification to escalate the war. So while security guarantees may seem like they would protect Ukraine in theory, in practice they could create new risks. There's another critical detail here. Zelensky constantly emphasizes territorial integrity based on the Constitution. if Ukraine insists on receiving security guarantees without accepting the loss of occupied territories. This creates an even more complex equation for the West, because the guarantor countries want to know exactly what the borders of Ukraine will be. So is there a realistic path in this chaos? Perhaps Ukraine will be steered toward a solution we might call a half-NATO model. That is, military training, advanced weapons, and financial support will be provided, but without a direct collective defense obligation. This model could ease Western concerns while offering Ukraine a certain security shield. But one thing must be remembered. No matter how strong these guarantees are, they depend on the military balance on the ground. If Russia continues advancing, the guarantees may remain only on paper. That is why the next critical issue comes into play, the possibility of a ceasefire. Because without slowing the pace of war, it is almost impossible to establish a lasting security order. Looking at the broader picture of the Ukraine war, the reality becomes clear. There are hopes for peace, diplomatic steps are being taken, but the facts on the ground remain harsh. Friendly photos in Washington, diplomatic optimism in Berlin and Paris, London's call for security guarantees. All of these give the impression of global unity. But behind the scenes, massive unresolved questions remain. Most importantly, as Russia continues to advance, all plans on the table grow weaker. Ukraine wants security guarantees, but without them, Putin is unlikely to step back. The West, on the other hand, promises support to Ukraine, yet avoids crossing the line into direct war with Russia. This dual structure prolongs the crisis. Trump's contradictory stance also clouds the future, saying in the Oval Office that a ceasefire was unnecessary, only to call for an immediate ceasefire a few hours later under European pressure, shows that the U.S. is not speaking with one voice. And let's not forget, without a U.S. decision, it is nearly impossible to end this war. Now, here's the critical point. If Putin manages to seize more territory before sitting down with Ukraine at the table, this will completely change the nature of peace talks. In other words, the map on the table is being redrawn according to the pace of the war. That's why the coming months may prove to be the most decisive phase of the war. And here I want to leave you with a question. Do you think the West is truly ready to provide Ukraine with a credible deterrent security guarantee? Or is this nothing more than diplomatic words meant to buy time? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate is not just for politicians. It concerns the future of all of us. If you watched this video this far, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video to show your support. Your support helps these analyses reach wider audiences. And remember, in my next video, I'll cover the most important topics on the agenda. See you in the next analysis. Goodbye for now.